Welcome to Soul Connections, a podcast about enchanting relationships with the human, more than human, and divine. I'm Emily, an astrologer, mystic, and herbalist.
I'm Aryn, an astrologer, writer, and creator.
And I'm Dani, a musician, astro minister, and organizer. We're your hosts. Join us for illuminating conversations with radiant guests and Astro Church sermons that weave astrology, mythology, and tarot.
Journey with us as we make meaning out of mystery through archetypes, patterns, and storytelling.
Welcome to another episode of Soul Connections. Today is October 20th, and we have another Astro Church sermon for you. My name is Emily. My pronouns are she, her, and I have a Taurus sun, Gemini moon, and Leo rising.
My name is Aryn. My pronouns are they, them, and I have a Capricorn sun and rising with a Taurus moon.
And I'm Dani. My pronouns are she with a capital S and they. And I have an Aries sun, a Pisces moon, and a Libra rising. Welcome to another Astro Church sermon. We place Astro Church at the end of the season to reflect on our lived experiences rather than try to predict them. Astro Church is about finding meaning in what we've been through, connecting deeply to the stories or narratives that we're living in, and discovering magic and hope for the future.
So before we get into our themes for this Astro Church sermon, we just wanted to share with our community and our listeners that this is our final episode of season 1 of the podcast. We are now at the tail end of Libra season, and this podcast began nearly a year ago with our first Astro Church sermon, which was connecting and reflecting upon Scorpio season. And that would have been near the end of November of last year. And it's just incredible to think about. We've been through all 12 zodiac signs. We've been through an entire revolution of the Wheel of the Year. And it has just been such a beautiful project. And we're excited to see, after taking a break, what will be the next iteration of this podcast. And we will definitely be back for season 2. But before that, I just wanted to take some time to reflect on the magic and the beauty of this podcast. And so I just wanted to share what this podcast has meant to me. One, this has been the most joyful, expansive, co-creative project that I have ever been a part of. Dani and Aryn are just such beloved friends and collaborators. And this has really rekindled my creative wells and re-sparked my love of astrology and really helped me build my confidence in self-expression, and also really taught me that collectively we can do hard things, and that podcasting is a beautiful art form and also a deep labor of love. And I'm really grateful to have learned about how to create a podcast. It's such a good skill to have. And ultimately, I'm just so grateful for all of our friends and community members that we've had the opportunity to interview and spotlight and uplift. We've had such incredible, moving conversations. And yeah, and we also did some in-person events this summer that Dani really took the lead on. And those were just 2 of my favorite days in the entire summer. So I'm just really grateful for this project, and I'm grateful for every single person who listens and shares this with their community.
I love that, Emily. Thank you so much for sharing. I so agree that it it's not just a podcast. Like it is, but it's also we've engage with it in such expansive community ways. And I think that's been a really big impact on me, just seeing all the ways that we can show up in our local community and also connect with people all over the country, which is awesome. I feel like my experience on this podcast has really healed, yeah, like some collaboration wounds that I was still carrying, and learning how to navigate sharing labor has been really impactful and really helpful, especially in such like loving ways, you know? And I also think on a personal level, it has really helped me evolve my own craft as an astrologer, develop my own voice, while also still remembering how important it is to be in community and collaboration with others. So much of my work is informed by you two. And I think that having that healthy balance of I'm just one fractal in the mosaic of this craft has been really humbling, but also like empowering too, because I now understand what my gifts are and what I can offer to others and also what I can receive. Specifically, when we did our Aries like event, Soul Connections launch event in Milwaukee, I was like so activated, and I remembered how much I love in-person stuff. And that event actually led me to put in a workshop proposal to Tooth and Nail, this really awesome like studio gallery space in Milwaukee, to host a workshop. So I really do feel like it has sort of a domino effect where it these experiences that we've had together have made me be like, oh, like what can I also do for my business and my career, and also how like my community outreach. And there's just so many connections and overlap between those things. So I just really appreciate both of you so much, and everybody who has engaged with Soul Connections. I do feel like we've created a platform for our community as well as ourselves, and that feels really nourishing. And it sort of just feels like an example of how we can engage in liberatory work of like mutually uplifting each other and other people as well. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Erin, and for what you shared, Emily. It's hard for me to put to words right now what something like this means to me, but I will try. I couldn't ask for better collaborators. I am so grateful to both of you for your unique voices, and also for what you've taught me, and also for your boundaries, like, behind the scenes. The way that we communicate with one another is um, very kind and also very direct and honest. And I really appreciate that. It makes me feel safe to be in collaboration with people who I know are going to advocate for themselves and say what they need. Um, I know that I cannot do great things completely alone. I know that deeply. And I need collaborators in my life. And it is hard to collaborate. Like, we're in Libra season and I'm a Libra rising, but I'm also an Aries sun. So I've got this like opposition thing. And I don't mean it's hard to collaborate with you two, because like you've been some of the easiest people for me to collaborate with. And also, even that is challenging. So, um, but also I can't, I said this in my interview, and that was another thing that was also really special for me, was to get to be interviewed about my art, because my art is not something that is always super tangible. I'm definitely somebody who, like, in the communities I'm in, you probably know me, but if you're not in my communities, like, you may not, or you may be like, I recognize you, but like, who are you? Where are you from? That kind of thing. Um, and that's because like my art is very relational. And so I feel like this has been a really cool experience to get something tangible out of a relational art form. So for me, that's like very, very special, because getting to do in-person events, combining music and mythology and storytelling and politics. And that's the other piece I wanted to touch on, was we live in a very volatile world. And since we started this in Scorpio season of last year, so much has changed, and the state has escalated its violence, severely against its own people. And I think that the reason that this has been allowed to happen is partially because it's going through its own cycle of death right now. And we're going to talk more about that today, actually. And also because we have believed in certain stories and certain narratives collectively that are actually untrue or harmful in certain ways. And I'm talking about like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but like also we have slavery legalized. Do you know what I'm saying? Like those contradictions. And so I think collectively, like people are like, posting on social media doesn't do anything, or like protesting and holding up a sign doesn't do anything, or like whatever, arguing with your uncle isn't going to do anything. And maybe it won't, but I actually think that it does do something. I actually think that any amount of narrative correction that we can do right now is so important. I actually think it's like essential, bare minimum. We should be speaking the truth. And I think this podcast is also a really beautiful way to combine the personal and the political and make meaning out of things. And that's ultimately for me what I've realized. I went through some personal things recently, and I need there to be meaning behind things. Like I need that in my life, and being the ways that we've been offered to make meaning as like on the mainstream, meaning like traditional organized religion and stuff like that, they don't work for a lot of us. And so offering other ways to make meaning and other ways to tell these stories, I think is essential, and essential part of my own activism. So I'm really grateful to this podcast for a lot of reasons. And one of the main ones is that it's an avenue for me to practice my activism and my art, So thank you both. And thank you to Soul Connections as a space and as a community, and all the people that we've got to interact with who are doing their art. And there can be nothing wrong with all of us doing our art, like that's so important that everybody is doing their art right now. So
Do like a little bam, 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 little air horn. Yeah, beautifully said.
I love it. So this is a special episode, not just because it's our last one of season 1, but we're also doing like an Astro Church combo. So we're going to be talking about Virgo and Libra season in this episode, which is kind of exciting because I think there's so much richness to talk about in the building of or the transition between those two signs. So in general, we're going to talk about a lot of different kinds of themes. I think transition is a big one, especially with fall in the Northern Hemisphere. We're going to talk about the 10 of Swords for our tarot connection. Fungi is our herbal connection. And in general, we're just going to reflect on the seasons, reflect on all the wildness of the eclipses, and just sort of have this moment of, in some ways, culmination of this entire process, as well as seasonally where we're at right now with astrology. Dani, would you like to take over for the universal shoutouts?
Yeah. So Astro Church existed before this podcast existed. And one piece of it that always runs through is this concept of universal shoutouts. And I got this from Prayers to the People in the All People's Church. They are a pretty rad Christian church in Milwaukee that does a lot of community work and support, specifically in the Harambe community. And the universal shoutouts are where we put out some good energy or loving energy, comforting energy to people or movements or anything that we really want to bring attention to or call in some lovely universal love to. And this can be things that we are celebrating, and also can be things that we're mourning or holding space for, anything like that. We always invite listeners to send us shout outs. Like Emily said at the top of the episode, we don't know what season 2 is going to look like yet. But if you are so inclined, I don't know that anyone has ever sent us a shout out. So you should send us one. And we will share it somehow on our social media and in our next iteration in some way. You can find the link to that on our Instagram profile under our link tree, or you can email us at soulconnectionspod@gmail.com. All right. So we're to get into the space of universal shoutouts. We like to take a little bit of a breath together. So I'm just going to ask everybody to just ground themselves in whatever seat or position that you're in. If you can touch the ground, that would be helpful. And if you can just imagine, the string kind of pulling you up and also connecting you to the ether and to the heavens, as well as rooting yourself into the ground wherever you're touching it. And if we can just kind of relax our shoulders and our face muscles a little bit, our hands if they're clenched. And then if you just take a deep breath in and then out, let it all the way out. Anybody like to start?
Go first. Thank you, Danny. I want to give my universal shout out to an incredible, very Libra coded project that I just got to be a part of this past weekend. So, my universal shout out is to the Astrologers Co op, which is a group of radical astrologers from all over the globe that have come together in an effort to form a legitimate workers cooperative for astrologers. And it's been about 2 years in the making now. And it's really been approached from like a creative lens. How can we come together, just like we do on this podcast? How can we share our voices, our creative self expression, our stories, and create something bigger than any of us could do on our own? And so it started as a year-long written project on Substack where many different astrologers wrote a specific piece for a decan, which there's 36 decans in the zodiacal wheel. And then this year, it evolved into a conference. And so this just happened on Saturday and Sunday. It was virtual. There were 20 astrologers who presented on such a diversity of topics, like some of the most unique approaches to astrology I've ever heard that just had me like mind blown. And I was very fortunate to be one of the presenters. And so I just want to give a shout out to the steering committee members who have been holding it down and building this project from the ground up without receiving any compensation for their labor. It's been volunteer labor. And we are working, I know they're moving towards getting themselves paid as they deserve to, but they put so much effort into this conference and made it possible. And I just want to shout out all my fellow co-presenters. I'm so inspired and empowered by you. And I'm just really excited to have more astrologers to be in community with. And it was just such a joy to present during my first conference, which is something I really see myself doing, speaking, teaching, that kind of thing. So just universal shout out to everyone and all the people who bought tickets and showed up to support. So universal shout out to the Astro Co-op.
I can go next. Thank you for sharing that, Emily. Definitely want to check out more and see if they're going to do another conference, hopefully next year. Awesome.
I think they want to.
Oh, yes. Okay. So I would like to shout out a local artist in Milwaukee who just had a really awesome, fun event at Yours Truly Studio. Lonesome Bill Walker had a really fun show called Glory Hole. It was like 3 days of just like back to back performances from other artists. There was like a gallery space, there were fun events. I went on Saturday and I attended a really fun dance class. And it's just really cool to see artists create these spaces that function both as a gallery where you can look at art, but also interactive and so many opportunities to engage and have fun. So, shout out to Bill and to the folks at Yours Truly Studio. It is so fun to see what local artists are just doing and like literally not waiting for permission, just creating the spaces themselves. And that is very inspiring to me. So, universal shout out to those artists.
I got to see all my queer-based friends, people that were just attending the event, feel so themselves and like get to play in a way that was really special. And I didn't get to go to this event, but I saw how it affected a lot of people around me in Milwaukee. And I just also want to reiterate, like, so cool. Everyone needs to be doing their art. seriously, because you don't even know how much of an impact that makes on people sometimes, specifically queer and trans people, a place to play and to experience love and joy and laughter and all of those things. Universal shout out to that. Yeah. And I want to shout out the Chicago Teachers Union because I think they are so rad and they are doing such important organizing, grassroots, boots to the ground stuff right now in Chicago when they're being threatened by the United States, like military basically, and secret police force. So this military occupation in Chicago is like horrific. And also it's so inspiring to see how people in Chicago organize and have been organizing and are organizing right now. And I think a lot of places, and including all the way up to their mayor, the mayor right now is like calling for a general strike. You know what I mean? So like anybody else with any kind of power needs to be paying attention to that because it's the only thing that's going to actually work right now. So I just really want a universal shout out all the organizers, all the people, all the community members who are fighting back in Chicago right now, and specifically the Chicago Teachers Union because they're just always so rad. And then I have just one more personal one. It's kind of sad, but I have a neighbor who just recently passed away, and I don't know a ton about him in his life, but I know he was alone a lot and he was a single person. I, as a single person for the majority of my life and having a lot of single people around me, I just want to shout out him and his life and affirm that there are people grieving over him that maybe didn't even know him that well. And that includes his neighbors. So I just want to shout him out and anyone else out there who is grieving him. And also for people out there who are single or feel alone, like there are people that love you and are out there thinking about you, even if you don't know it. So universal shout out. Anybody have anything else to add? No? Okay. If we can just take one more deep breath in, if we can just put our feet on the ground, root ourselves down, feel the string pulling us up, and take a deep breath in. Okay, now, universal shout out. And I'm going to keep the mic right now because I'm going to transition us into our story connection for today. Demeter, goddess of agriculture and harvest, lived a simple life with her beautiful, youthful daughter, Persephone. A life of pleasure, beauty, abundance, and love. The two were inseparable. Demeter adored her daughter, always fawning over her grace and beauty, and she was fiercely protective of her. She knew her family, the ruling gods of Mount Olympus. She knew their extractive, dominating ways, especially her brothers. And she was determined to shield Persephone from their cruelty and exploitation, to keep her innocence hidden away from their reach. Still, attention was growing. Suitors from across realms were drawn to Persephone, and none more persistently than Hades, Demeter's brother and ruler of the underworld. No matter how many times he tried, Demeter refused to let her daughter be taken. Persephone, for her part, had no idea what she didn't know. She wandered the earth innocently, picking flowers, eating fruits, thinking the world was nothing but beauty and comfort. But something in her stirred, a quiet, curious longing, something deep in her spirit. Somewhere in that high priestess part of her being, eventually, Hades took a different route. He went through the bureaucracy. He struck a deal with Zeus, who agreed to let Hades take Persephone as his wife and queen of the underworld. So that's what Hades did. Zeus planted a stunning narcissus flower where Persephone would find it. When she bent down to pick it, the earth cracked open beneath her feet. Hades burst forth in a horse-drawn chariot, seizing Persephone and dragging her into the underworld. Demeter was devastated. She had tried everything to protect her daughter from the corruption of her family, and now she was being manipulated into becoming queen of the underworld. In protest, Demeter withdrew her gifts from the world. She walked the earth in mourning, and everything withered in her wake. If she couldn't have her daughter, the earth would starve. And so began the long winter. Meanwhile, Persephone was raging. She begged Hades to let her return to her mother, who she knew must be drowning in grief. But Hades refused. Instead, he offered Persephone a throne, a home, a chance to rule as queen of the underworld. And even though she was worried about her mother, something inside Persephone sparked. For the first time, she was out of her comfort zone, and she kind of loved it. She had never been anywhere like the underworld. It was beautiful in its own way, dark, mysterious, and also powerful. And Hades, well, he was kind of hot. And he treated her with dignity, with care, with respect. As the days passed, Persephone began to love him. But more importantly, she started to learn about herself. She was in transition, no longer just a maiden. She was becoming a queen, reckoning with the innocence she'd have to leave behind to step into her own power. But still, she missed her mother deeply, and she wanted to return to Earth, even if just for a while. Back on Earth, humans were furious. They begged Zeus to do something, starving through a winter that had no end. Zeus pleaded with Demeter to let it go, to bring the harvest back, but she refused. Eventually, Zeus caved. He sent Hermes to the underworld with orders for Hades, return Persephone to her mother. Hades knew he had to obey. Zeus was king, after all, so he prepared for her return. He threw a feast, fruits, sweets, drinks, everything Persephone had come to love. He wanted her to remember their time together with sweetness. But Persephone had grown wiser. She remembered something her mother had once told her: never eat anything offered to you in the underworld. She saw the trick, but not wanting to be rude, or maybe wanting to hold on to just a little piece of this strange new life, she ate 6 pomegranate seeds. Just 6. That couldn't possibly count as a real meal, right? She was wrong. By consuming any food from the underworld, she was bound to it. She would have to return. But Earth couldn't remain barren forever. Demeter was on strike. So Zeus offered a compromise. Persephone would spend half of the year in the underworld, 1 month for each pomegranate seed, and the other half of the year on Earth with her mother. Demeter and Hades agreed, though neither was exactly thrilled. But Persephone, she got the best of both worlds. Each year, when she returned to the underworld, Demeter grieved, withdrawing her care from the land, leaving it cold and barren. And each spring, when Persephone returned, Demeter rejoiced, bringing life back to Earth. Flowers bloomed, crops grew, and warmth returned. And that is the story of the seasons. I'm going to turn it over to Aryn to talk about our tarot connection, the Ten of Swords.
Thank you so much for that, Dani. That was such a beautiful telling of the story. And I really like how you emphasized Persephone's agency and her transformation as well. So for our tarot connection, we have the 10 of Swords. And before we started recording, I think Emily pointed out that in all of the Astro Church episodes we've never had like a major arcana card, which is really interesting. We've had a lot of minor and also a lot of court cards too. So I don't really know what that means, but it is interesting and it's been fun to explore, you know, cards that typically when people learn tarot, they don't start with minor arcana. At least that's like how I started, very major arcana focused. So anyway, on the screen, if you are listening, we have 2 depictions of the 10 of Swords. The first one is from Lisa Sterl's Modern Witch Tarot deck, which you can see the modern interpretation of someone on their phone, maybe doom scrolling. That's how I like to see it. The other one, I believe, is from the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot deck, and it depicts a person laying face down with 10 swords in their back. So this card is quite evocative because, I mean, it's painful to have a bunch of swords in your person. However, I do think that there is a few different ways to look at this. Because it's a 10, meaning it's at the end, there's a sort of culmination of the suit of swords. So on one hand, we're depicting a scene that's quite painful. You might have experienced betrayal, loss, things that are very intense, emotions that are hard to grapple with. And also, it's at the 10, so it's at the end of something. You might not fully be out of it yet, but you're getting to the end of something, and there's relief in that. I actually pulled this card reversed when I first pulled it out, and when you flip it, I actually have a picture of it now. You flip it, it looks like the swords are falling out. Again, not a fun process because even having a sword removed from your body is quite painful, but there's like relief. There's like, this won't last forever. And I also do think this card speaks to this idea that you might not have been able to control what happened to you. We can't always control loss, right? Like that's sort of the tension of grief, is that it happens beyond our control. But there's a sort of relinquishing to that feeling. There's a sort of like, all right, this is painful. I'm just going to lay here for a little bit longer. There's also an element of accepting what happened. Sometimes it's even more painful when we deny stuff that hurts us and live in this like not really acknowledging our pain. The Ten of Swords does not let us get away with that for very long. And there's a sort of like excruciating aspect of not fully allowing yourself to feel that intensity of emotion. I do feel like it could symbolize this transition from like, oh, woe is me, everything bad happens to me, to have a little bit more agency. Even the idea of like, you know, sometimes we're betrayed or people do things that hurt us. And sometimes it's not even about us. Like sometimes people act out their own wounding and we are impacted by it and affected by it, but it may not even be about us. So that's another way that you can look at this card of figuring out and relinquishing what has been done to you and having a little bit of agency about it too. Dani or Emily, do y'all have anything you would like to add to the Ten of Swords?
I mean, I think you did a really, I mean, I think that to me is the essence of the Ten of Swords is like, it's over, it's done. Like, we're done with a certain narrative. And like you mentioned, Aryn, that's not always a fun process, you know? Um, but it's really important to be honest. We're going to talk a little later about Mercury and what Mercury's been doing. And like, Mercury's the communication planet. And like, I do think there's an energy of like needing to be honest. You know, Libra is the justice card, major arcana card in the tarot. And justice is about what is reality, what is the truth, what is present here, you know? So the Ten of Swords, like, things have been revealed and it's good to come to that place. It's good to be in that place. We don't want to be the Nine of Swords. We're in anxiety and fear and nightmares, and we're being kept up all night by these narratives. So to have them be over finally, to have, again, there is relief in that. And I associate it definitely with like, we are having a lot of the narratives that we've believed in collectively be revealed to us right now. And they're uncomfortable, a lot of them. But I think it's really important that we allow these things to be revealed.
Yeah, I like that you brought in the narrative aspect of it. And I think the modern witch tarot deck's depiction of the person on the phone can sort of speak to that we often receive other people's stories, other people's perspectives. And sometimes we just need to like put the phone down, put our computer away, like stop reading the newspaper, because I think, yeah, connecting to that inner voice seems important in this card too. But before we do that, we have to like move through those other emotions.
Yeah, this just feels very aligned for this aftermath of eclipse season, especially with eclipse season ending with the solar eclipse in Virgo the day before the equinox. And I think, yeah, like clearing out the noise, right? All of those stories and voices that kind of cloud and lead to anxiety, right? Lead to triggering fear, and just like releasing that, right? Like what you said about putting the phone down. And I also, Dani and I really look to Lindsay Mack for a lot of tarot teachings. And I appreciate Lindsay Mack's talking about like the medicine of the Ten of Swords and the Suit of Swords really being about, right? Like literally our mental health. And when we get to the 10, it's like whatever narrative or belief construct, right, that maybe kept us, in a state or in a loop or in a pattern. In the 10 of Swords, like Dani was saying, the transition, like from the 9 to the 10, with the 9, like that's keeping you up at night. In the 10, it's like, oh, it's being composted. A story, maybe a pattern, like a mental pattern, a mental loop, a belief I had constructed about myself or whatever it might be is composted. And we're like, oh, we're no longer thinking or believing that way anymore. And we're moving into a new cycle. And I really just wanted to point out in both cards, if you're looking at the images, dawn is breaking, like the sun is about to rise. And so it all just feels very much this like culmination, ending energy. So I think it's very fitting. So with that, I will transition into our herbal connection. And so our herbal connection is not an herb, but I mean, they are in a kingdom all of their own, but just fungi in general, the magical, mysterious, amazing kingdom of the fungi. So they're not an animal, they're not a plant, they're in a classification all their own. And so if you can see the graphic that we're sharing on the screen on the right, I was out on a hike yesterday in the forest and there's this log that had fallen. And so fungi feed their food. They will eat, they'll grow out of trees because they are breaking down and consuming that tree, dead trees. And so this log had fallen over and just I've never seen a log completely discovered in fungi, and it was just, like, so enchanting and just, like, mesmerizing. I just, like, stopped and, like, squatted there and, like, sat with them for a while, took a bunch of pictures, but, the thing about fungi that feel really connected to Virgo and Libra, I actually usually will tell people that I connect, mycelial networks and fungi with the sign of Virgo, because Virgo is like the mercurial expression of the psychopomp, this entity, this being that is traversing the realms and guiding souls to the underworld. And so the fruiting bodies that we see of mushrooms, that is like their reproductive like organ. But then really what the fungi are doing underneath the ground that are invisible to us, so essentially in the underworld, like I think like fungi are so connected to the underworld, they have these little single cell hyphae that are like these little white threads, and that's what forms the mycelial network. And so, if you've ever seen the movie, the documentary Fantastic Fungi on Netflix, 10 out of 10 recommend. Paul Stamets, he like lifts up like a fallen log in the forest, and you see all these little threads, and that's what we would consider the mycelial network. And so to me, there's this connection to Virgo of like, we're breaking down, we're composting. Like fungi are literally the digestive tract of the earth. And so they're breaking down all of the dead plants, the dying trees, right? Like this log in this photo is literally being decomposed by these fungi to then become nutrients for the soil. And then they are connecting underground. And not only are they connecting to one another, they are literally forming connections and channels of communication between tree roots, right? And there's kind of this like worldwide, like it's believed like through like all the soil across the world that there's this like mycelial network that's kind of like the internet, but like the earth's version of the internet. And so the mycelial network, like trees, they will literally send like electrical messages between trees, and they will like trees will send out their communication and they will send it through the mycelial network to then send it the message to another tree. It is really amazing. Fungi are just phenomenal, but I think they're very much related to the underworld, the unseen, and just this very much this decomposing, composting, right? Like very much end of the cycle, breaking down so that new life can be born. And so that is why I chose fungi for our herbal connection today. And then I just wanted to add I think the Libra connection for me with fungi is like the connectivity, like connecting, socializing, like there is like a network of beings, and that feels very Libra to me. So with that, I believe we will now be transitioning into talking about the archetypes of Virgo and Libra. And would anyone like to begin?
I can do Virgo. As someone with Mars in Virgo, I've been unpacking my Virgo-ness lately. So I would say, okay, Virgo is associated with Mercury. So there's this sort of earthy version of like Mercury's rulership in Gemini. And I think both Gemini and Virgo have this interconnectivity, like just like Emily was talking about with the mycelium network. There's this desire to like relay messages, to share, to talk, to expand through communication. And I think though the distinction between, Gemini and air expression of Mercury versus Virgo, the earth expression of Mercury, is that Virgo takes it a little step further and is a little more systematic with it. So I think of Virgo as the scientific method, the ability to observe, to collect data, to analyze. I feel like for me personally, having a Mars in Virgo, there's this deep desire to understand things on a deep level, in a way though where I'm constantly taking things in. I'm observing, I'm looking at the world, I'm collecting data. Whether or not that data gets used, that's not important. It's more of just like the process of it. And I think there's this sense of refinement that Virgo has. It's, its associations or its mutability, meaning that it comes at the end of a season where it's sort of transitioning. In the northern hemisphere, it's transitioning like summer and fall, so you get a little bit of that double-bodied vibe. Even just on a seasonal level, the weather of the days can feel like summer or feel like fall or feel kind of like a combination of both. And Virgo, I think, sort of grapples like different modes, different ideas, different landscapes. Even thinking about Mercury was like one of the only gods who could go to the underworld and leave. So this ability to translate, to move throughout different spaces rather relatively freely. Virgo is also associated with the Virgin, which it's kind of a loaded thing now because when that symbol was created, we didn't yet have this like purity culture around virginity, but virgin back then just meant somebody like a maiden on their own, like somebody who didn't depend on others. And so I do think that there's this sense of like wholeness and like it is what it is, and also harvest too. I think Virgo is associated with like harvest season. I think we get a little bit of that with like Libra and Leo too. So it's in between those two signs. And I feel like Virgo's reputation of like the perfectionist comes less from this desire to actually create a perfected form and more from like the process. The verb to perfect is to constantly hone. And so to me, like I feel like I embody this energy when I'm committed to my craft, committed to thinking about ideas and philosophies not as stagnant, right? We have that mutability. So there's movement to it. There's this like forever evolution. And I think sometimes Virgo energy can manifest in this like capitalist world that demands product, demands like almost this like unrelenting process of perfectionism, not for the sake of like I want to do better, but for like I want to like create a better product. I think we can get stuck in that sometimes. And so it's fun to kind of like, if we take away the gauze that is like our cultural perceptions of labor and commitment and refinement, I think that Virgo embodies a very beautiful principle of just like nothing is ever stagnant. There's always room to improve it. And there's like a joy and like a exhilaration in that process itself. To me, it's exciting to constantly be refining my perspectives on life. Yeah, I feel like Virgo is just I love Virgo. It's a great energy. Any other things that y'all would like to add about that archetype and that energetic field?
Yeah, I think for me with Virgo, the keyword is like two keywords, devotion and service. And Virgo, yeah, being very much in devotion to their craft and to the process of that craft. Like you were saying, Aryn, that refinement and just getting it down, right, to a flow. And also, I always think of like the seasonality of Virgo in the Northern Hemisphere. Like you were saying, it's that double-bodied mutable season. It's the end. It marks the completion of summer. Comes after Leo, right? We have fixed fire, and then we move into Virgo season, mutable earth. And this actually, I view it's like, I think with me, with Virgo, there is a grief energy to it because it is literally preparing us to enter the underworld. Just like the story that Dani shared about Persephone and Demeter, I think it's almost like Virgo is like the buildup to Persephone's capture or even that, and I think Virgo can be represented by the maiden version of Persephone. And also, right, there is a connection to the grain harvest, and, that would be Demeter, goddess of the grain. And there's also a connection to other spiritual deities or figures like the Virgin Mary, very much connected, I think, to Virgo as well, and any type of grain goddess in any cultural pantheon. So I do think of Virgo, yeah, being of service and there being a deep level of devotion. And I have so many amazing Virgos in my life. I am married to a Virgo and my grandma is a Virgo. I think I have my lot of fortune in Virgo. So I just think, and it's my second house. I feel like just that Virgoan way of being is like how I resource myself. And I just think it's such a beautiful sign.
Let's talk a little about Libra. Libra, coming from Virgo, the personology book, which was like one of my entrances into astrology. And I think a lot of people were entered into astrology and through the personology book. And that's that big book of birthdays that like breaks down your tarot card and your numerology and like all this other stuff. And it was interesting. I just want to say that their little study was very interesting because they actually studied people that have these birthdays alongside of incorporating these different things. So it is kind of cool. And they have Virgo Libra as the cusp of beauty, they call it. And that makes a ton of sense if you ask me, because it's like Virgo is doing that like steady work to like cultivate and to like put the finishing touches on the harvest season, And Libra is ruled by Venus. It is the cardinal air sign. So we just moved from Virgo, which is a mutable sign, into Libra, which is a cardinal sign. So cardinal signs start seasons, okay? And so Libra starts in the northern hemisphere, our autumn, our fall season, and that's on the equinox. And the equinox is when the fall equinox is when the scales tip we're going to have more darkness coming for us. And it kind of goes rapidly, like how quickly after the equinox, it starts to get darker earlier and earlier. And Libra is a relational sign. It's the scales of justice is the image of it. And it has to do with the other, the relationship with the other, but it's ruled by Venus. So there's a grace and a like magic to being able to have a conversation or throw a really nice soiree and like have everyone getting along, or to be a lawyer and to negotiate, be a diplomat and be able to talk through a conflict or hard things. Libra's opposite is Aries, which we sometimes get into the opposites. We always are engaging opposites in any solar season. And Aries is about the self. It's, the cardinal fire sign. And so like with the relationship with Libra, it's self and other. How is the self reflected by the other? How do we incorporate the needs of the self and the other? And Libra kind of gets a little bit of a rep for being like indecisive and like passive. No. To me, it's like Libra is not passive at all. It can be manipulative in that it uses the skill of conversing, narrative spinning, narrative telling. Like it uses relational ability to be able to hear someone out, validate them, and then make a decision from a place of considering all the options. Maybe they take a little longer to make a decision, but usually it's because Libra's really, truly considering all aspects. Libra's one of the most brilliant at being able to come up with compromise that works for everybody. Like to be able to, like I said, it's the justice card. It is what is. So it about being able to hold that space for both beauty and life and fertility, and also like death and conflict and disagreement and, all of those things. Composting, because the next sign we know that comes is Scorpio, which is our composting season. So those are my basics about Libra. Does anyone want to add anything?
Yeah, I was actually really thinking about our interview that we did with Osea, which we just released. It's our latest interview episode. Definitely take a listen if you want to get like a deeper insight into someone who really embodies Libra energy. Obviously, Danny does too, as our resident Libra rising. And so does Osea, our latest interview guest. And we talked a lot about like Libra and how Osea lives and embodies Libra. And one of the biggest things that I think is like one of my biggest like reframes or just understandings around Libra is like generative conflict, right? Like Danny was naming at the beginning, like collaborating with people is joyful and expansive and truly like the only way to live life, I would argue. And it's very difficult, even in easeful, right? Like beautiful collaborations, like there's still people with different needs and different opinions, right? And it's like, harmony, that's the thing with Libra. Harmony is not stasis. And I think I said this in the interview with Osea. Like, it's a constant, right? It's a cardinal air sign. It's a constant readjustment. So there's almost like this connection between Virgo and Libra being refining and readjustment, where Libra's trying to readjust and find the harmony and find the balance. And that requires compromise, willing to see all different sides, willing to hold nuance and paradox, right? All of that, and not getting bogged down or trapped by binaries, and being able to move, right? And like being able to meet people where they're at and like talk to all different people in a group. And so that those are all skills that I feel like is needed to truly engage in like generative conflict. I also think about Libra with like nonviolent communication methods and being really intentional, right? Because engaging in conflict can be so activating and so triggering. And a lot of people, I would say the majority of people in this world, are not skillful in conflict because we have to be taught these skills. We have to practice them because otherwise, right? Like our nervous systems may get triggered. It may, remind us of trauma from, previous times, whatever it may be. So to me, there is just like really skillful ability of Libra to engage in generative conflict with the outcome to be some type of harmony or collaboration, or compromise. So to me, it's like, I think, yeah, there's a lot of stereotypes of Libra. I will say, yes, maybe one of the shadow sides, and I see this in like my partner who has Venus and Mercury in Libra. Depending on, right, like your lived experiences, people with prominent Libra placements may struggle with identifying their own needs, right? And maybe this is where this indecision comes from, is that maybe they've been conditioned to always focus on other people's needs, that it disconnects them and severs them from their own needs. And I think that's where that indecision comes from. Because if you don't know what you need or want, how can you make a decision to move forward? So I think that's just where that comes from.
Yeah, I want to say something about that because I, being Libra and Aries, like it to me, it's like fawn and flight response or fight responses. You know what I'm saying? Like Aries is like fight, defend, and Libra is very like make everything smooth, like smooth everything over. My mother is also a Libra rising, so I was like raised by this person who is very averse to uncomfortable social dynamics. And I do see that in every single Libra placement, every single one. They are very uncomfortable with people not liking them and getting along. Like, and because they're cardinal, they will take action to ensure that that happens. But again, like any sign, like these are like the unskillful ways to use that superpower, but it is still a superpower to be able to take a tense situation and hold space for it and work some magic to like calm it enough to be able to analyze it rationally and to make the right decision, the just and fair decision. And that's where I think everyone with prominent Libra placements is being called to consider their perspective equally to others' perspective. And in our world, like we're not really like we're not a just society. We're not in like a Libra ruled world, even though we'd like to imagine ourselves to be with the scales of justice. But like ultimately, like the only way to move through conflict, and Libra wisely knows this, is if every single person involved is able to be heard and seen, and then move from there to come up with a compromise that could work for everybody. And that takes time. So people also are like maybe a little impatient with a Libra's process of taking that time. And if you're taught, oh, the process that you take takes too much time or whatever, if you're taught that, like you are going to be like more averse to taking that time. You're going to be like, you know what? Why don't let's just not even engage in it. We don't have time for this right now, like that kind of thing. But it actually can be a really like, it's sort of the wound is the medicine type energy where it's like, it can be a superpower of Libras that they are able to they actually do have the ability to hold space for both themselves and the others. I think it's just getting past some social conditioning that makes us responsible for other people's stuff in like a toxic way, not in like a collaborative community way. Do we want to talk about the planets that rule these and kind of what they've been doing too? So should we talk about Virgo? The planet that rules Virgo is Mercury. Do we want to talk first about the transits and then kind of go into the planets?
Yeah, I think if we just do an overview of the transits, we didn't want to overwhelm everybody because it's right. We're doing 2 seasons in one astro church, which is usually we just focus on one. So I can just briefly kind of give an overview. So again, when we're talking about seasons, it means the sun is in that sign. And so the sun was in Virgo from August 22nd until September 22nd. And then the sun entered Libra on the fall equinox in the northern hemisphere, right? Danny was saying cardinal air, cardinal signs initiate seasons. So the fall equinox was September 22nd this year, and then it goes until October 22nd. So a couple more days as of this recording. And then we usually emphasize the moon. So we also like to highlight some of the main like lunar transits of the season. And we usually focus on the new and the full moon. And so in Virgo season, we were in eclipse season. And we will certainly be talking about this. And honestly, I blame the eclipses are why we're merging these 2 episodes because the eclipse season was just eclipsing really hard, and life was lifing, and so we had to adapt. So we had that lunar eclipse in Pisces, which I would love to like wax poetic about actually how beautiful that eclipse was. It started out really beautifully.
So classic Pisces too, like for it to be like the end of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was like an ending, but it was like ending, and then it was just like bam, real life. Here you go.
Yeah, and then the Virgo eclipse like reality check, like rude awakening. So yeah, there is that lunar eclipse and not right. And just because we're saying it was beautiful doesn't mean that it was enchanting for everybody. There is probably still a lot of big feelings and struggles with that eclipse. So I just want to honor that. And then we went, then we kind of have this when we say eclipse portal, that's the time period, the 2 weeks between the two eclipsed phases of the moon. So then we went into a solar eclipse, which is a new moon, and that was the day before the equinox. And that's the chart that you see here, which we'll talk a little bit about later, in Virgo at 29 degrees of Virgo. And then when we moved into Libra season, we were out of eclipse season and we had a full moon in Aries on October 6th. And we will be having a new moon in Libra tomorrow on October 21st.
Does someone want to share their thoughts about the eclipse season this year? I mean, one thing I do want to say before we get into too much about it is that this was the first Libra season. So we're in Libra season right now. This was the first Libra season in a couple of years that is without an eclipse portal. So we just went through Libra Aries eclipses the last couple of years. And so I just want to say that this was the first Libra season free of that energy. So I think that's kind of interesting. As far as the eclipses in Pisces and Virgo, we've been in this story for a year now, right? The first eclipses in Pisces and Virgo were a year ago in Virgo season. And then we had some eclipses in Pisces season 6 months ago or 7 months now. And then we had these eclipses on September 7th and September 21st. And this eclipse portal was, I mean, I feel like I cannot fully separate it from my personal experience because I went through a really dramatic eclipse portal. But also, I feel like our collective went through a really dramatic eclipse portal too, because on September 10th was the murder of Charlie Kirk. And there was a definite, like, we're going to talk about Mercury eventually, and we're talking about Ten of Swords, which to me has to do with narratives. And the Charlie Kirk murder is it's going to be a very important moment in when talking about the narratives that we all are living under and propaganda and how they are spinning certain stories now. And the more that they repeat it, the more people, the masses, believe it or don't believe it, depending on where you're at, you know. And the more that they punish the people who don't believe the given narrative, you know, the more that more and more people are going to be inclined to comply, right? So it's interesting to me that we're talking about story and propaganda in a Pisces Virgo eclipse portal, because like Pisces is about the worlds, other worlds, and our dreams and our visions, and also our illusions and our delusions, right? But it's about world building, right? And Virgo is very much the side of it that's actually doing the little communications and the building and the organizing and all of that kind of stuff. So I just want to throw that out there, that I think this eclipse season was pretty impactful. Like, I think we're going to remember this eclipse season for a very long time. Anybody want to add anything to that? Talk about that?
I really appreciate that you bringing up story. And I think we're like always talking about this on this podcast. I feel like with our story connections and, you know, the story of tarot cards, the story of different things. And I think it's really central to what we do. But yes, I think it was especially to the forefront. And it is especially obvious to me the ways that narrative is weaponized, which has always been a tool / weapon, depending on who's wielding it. And so I do really feel like, for me as a storyteller, really activated by what was happening, because there was like misconstrued reality to fit this like very narrow scope that the government wants to create. And that's always a red flag to me, because story is expansive. Like, that's the whole fucking point, is that there's like multiple stories, mosaic of all the stories. But it's so interesting to me how they're like really trying to like push it into this really narrow, constrictive like way to view the world, and even policing people's perspectives and thoughts about the story was really interesting to me. And I saw this post yesterday about all the ways to engage in, you know, anti-fascist, anti-authoritarian work. And one of it, like, they named it as the narrative war. That's what propaganda is. And so I've just sort of been feeling like this eclipse has really stirred up like my specific role as like an educator and a writer. And I wonder if other folks are feeling that as well, where like, you know, even if you don't identify as a writer or a storyteller, you are telling stories to yourself and telling stories to others. And social media is a huge platform for storytelling. And so I just sort of want to affirm that you sharing your perspective about things is helpful, especially in a context where they're really trying to like narrow the scope of who gets to tell stories and like what is seen as legitimate and true. Yeah, putting your messy perspective out there is actually a way in which to engage in resistance. So that's what I'd like to say about that.
Thank you, Erin. I just wanted to share actually what you just shared made me think of, not necessarily, it wasn't during eclipse season, but I listened during Libra season to Dean Spade's new podcast, Love in a Fucked Up World, which is of the same name of their new book. And this is like such a deeply embodiment of Libra as an archetype. And Dean Spade is a trans radical organizer. And so I believe he has a law background, and he used to work for the Sylvia Rivera Law Project. And so he has a lot of abolitionist and anti-fascist organizing. And so he's kind of in like the organizing world, definitely someone as like a writer um, and a speaker and an educator. And he wrote the book Mutual Aid, which I believe came out in 2020, which I have on my bookshelf. And so this latest book, Love in a Fucked Up World, is all about relationships in our movement spaces. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, like what Aryn was saying, like people really figuring out what their roles and you feeling very clear during this eclipse portal, your role in our like collective liberation is teaching and writing. There was an interview that Dean did with Tourmaline, another radical trans organizer and author of the biography of Marsha P. Johnson that came out this year. And it's a delightful episode. It's a conversation with Dean and Tourmaline and their friend Morgan. And one of the things that Tourmaline was saying was that really viewing that like every site in our lives can be a site for liberation. And that's been something I've really been marinating, right? Like even this podcast, right? Like our co-creative offerings, the stories that we tell, right, in this podcast, or the stories that we tell, right, like on social media, wherever we may be, like these can all be sites of liberation. And really, I think like our one-on-one and our interpersonal relationships and how we're approaching our relationship dynamics. Are we engaging in generative conflict, or are we repeating cycles of abuse and harm in our interpersonal relationships? So I just really appreciated what Tourmaline kind of amplified of like every place in our life can be a site of liberation. And I think it's like we need that complete reframe. And it can even be in the most mundane person to person, interpersonal levels of how we just interact with our next door neighbor. It can be a site of liberation.
Yeah. And, I think that's a good transition into Mercury because Mercury to me is the one chit chatting with the neighbors. You know what I'm saying? So, can we maybe start with just like a brief what's Mercury about in general and then talk about what it was doing? Could we do that? Yeah. I'll do it. Mercury, our sweet friend Mercury. Mercury is the ruling planet of Virgo and also Gemini. So it has this rulership of both signs. Mercury is the messenger god with winged shoes and able to flit from Mount Olympus down to the underworld and back again. In our story, Mercury is Hermes, the messenger god who made the negotiations around Persephone for Zeus at first. So, Mercury being associated with the word merchant, there's also, the caduceus, which is the sword with the snake around it, and is one of Mercury's symbols. And we find that in like medical stuff. So, we associate Mercury with like medicine and anything that has to do with like communicating one thing to the next. So like some like technology stuff can be associated with Mercury. Whenever Mercury goes retrograde is when we have failures in transportation because again Mercury's going flitting from here to there to the next thing, making connections. Also paying attention to details in Virgo, Mercury as ruler of Virgo, that's where to me the merchant, the medicine, stuff like that comes in to kind of show how Mercury can kind of take things apart, help us to sort things and make some sort of rational sense of it. Virgo is an earth sign, so Mercury ruling this earth sign, it's done in a very earthy way to be contrasted with like Gemini, the trickster and, stuff like that. So Mercury was in Virgo for some of Virgo season, most of Virgo season, right? And then it moved into Libra until October 6th, and then into Scorpio on October 6th. And in Scorpio, it's been doing some kind of intense things with Mars. I'll give a little pause to see if anybody wants to jump in and talk a little about Mercury this season or Mercury as an archetype.
Well, just in like the season that we've been in presently, Mercury and Mars have been really close. And even as we move into Scorpio season, it's going to continue to sort of like hang out with each other as it goes into Sagittarius. And so I do think that melding of Mercury and Mars energy is quite interesting. It has already manifested for me of like news being brought up from the underworld, action being required once you learn information. So, because Mars is a very assertive and action oriented sign, having those combinations of those energies merging, depending on the signs that they're in. Also, Mercury is going to get ready for retrograde in Sagittarius soon as well. So, just wanted to add that.
I think it's just interesting. So, in the chart that we have in the graphic here, this was the solar eclipse in Virgo. And so, like Danny was saying, Mercury rules Virgo. And so, the ruler of the eclipse, Mercury, was at 5 degrees of Libra. And then Libra is ruled by Venus. And at the time of the eclipse, Venus was in Virgo. And so, in astrology, we would call this, it's the concept of mutual reception, which means that two planets are swapped and in one another's home signs. And so they kind of have this like connection of like Mercury is in Venus's realm and is like connecting with Venus and like, being in her home while Venus is in Mercury's realm of Virgo. And so there's almost like these blending of these planets and these zodiac archetypes. And I think, it's very prevalent that we're talking about Virgo and Libra, and we've been talking about their blending. And I think that blend of them was really emphasized during this solar eclipse, but also just kind of during this Virgo Libra season. We've really had these two ruling planets in each other's signs, kind of melding these experiences and these archetypes together. So, Aryn, would you like to talk about Venus?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think Danny did a really awesome job earlier talking about Venus archetype through Libra being a planet that's very invested in cooperation and harmony. Again, I agree that Venus is not passive, like what? And is very proactive in creating harmony. And, Venus rules both Libra and Taurus. And so we get to see different iterations of that energy manifest through an air sign, a cardinal air sign, and a fixed earth sign, which there are a lot of overlap in terms of like valuing beauty, valuing justice. They just tend to go about it in different ways. I think Venus and Libra tends to be a little more cerebral, because Libra is an air sign. So the what does justice mean in our words, in our language, in our social structures? Venus in Taurus, I think, is a little bit more grounded, a little more material. I think Venus expressed through Taurus is concerned with, do people have what they need? Do they have comfort? Are they well resourced to take care of their needs? But also, I think about this idea a lot as a moon in Taurus, this idea of public luxury. Luxury has been, I think, co opted by ultra wealthy as this privileged experience. But I want to live in a world where everybody has access to luxury. And I define luxury as just the finer things in life that I don't think need to be gatekeeped. Anyway, I digress. But I think, again, we have this merging of beauty and justice and love and connection. And Venus knows very well that this is a process that doesn't end and that is always requiring us to show up and be participants in terms of what Venus has been doing. So we had Venus in Leo from August 25th to September 19th. Then we had Venus in Virgo, which Venus is in fall in Virgo because it is exalted in Pisces. And so Venus in Virgo can grapple a little bit with, I think, scarcity, with the shadow side of like over committing to a cause without taking care of yourself, and Also, though, there's this very service-oriented kind of perspective. You know, Emily mentioned Virgo's connection with service, being of service to the collective, to others, using your gifts to help others. And I do think that Venus and Virgo transit could potentially stir that up for folks. Now, where we are right now is Venus is back in its domicile, meaning home. So Venus is in Libra right now. And I just shared that, you know, Venus is one of the rulers of Libra. And so it's interesting that we have this like, it goes from like Venus in fall. So like Venus is not really well resourced. It has to be a little more creative and dynamic with what it has. Then we go right back into like Venus's queendom or kingdom, where it is really well resourced and where we can tap into this justice oriented like intellectual framework that Venus and Libra offers us. And when we had the eclipses in this chart, if you're looking at the video of our podcast recording, the solar eclipse in Virgo, we did have Venus in Virgo as well. So we've had like Venus like kind of go throughout different signs throughout this transition as well.
Yeah, I really think it's interesting what you're talking about with Venus in Virgo and its fall being kind of like overextending oneself. And to me, like this is where like the Libra Virgo thing can be maybe a little controlling. I don't know exactly how to, like, people have said to me, they're like, Libra's controlling. I remember my friend Quinn saying that. And she's a Leo, and I think her mom is a Libra. So, like, there's some sort of conversation there too. But at first, I was like, what? That's not true. You know what I mean? And then I just started to, like, kind of think about it. And I was like, well, when you're, like, trying to make something happen when you add the Virgo like devotional and critical lens that Virgo has of being able to kind of see all the things that could go right and wrong and all the possibilities, that mutable energy. And then you filter that through this like desire for justice and harmony and fairness, you know, and like the cardinal energy to like do something about it. There can be a little bit of like I'm the only one in the group who does anything, you know, and the only one who can do it. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. And I think it's beautiful actually that Mercury is also in Libra to kind of balance that out a little bit, to be like, hey, like, I mean, not right now. I'm saying like in this chart and in that time that we were going through, which we all were collectively going through it and still are. I think having that Mercury in Libra can kind of balance that Venus in Virgo fall thing going on, because Mercury in Libra is just a communicator of justice, of fairness, and could maybe put some words to things that are sometimes challenging to put words to. I don't know. I don't know if that makes any sense. And
It does.
also, it's interesting to me that Mercury moved. You know, we always are moving from, like, we move from this Venusian sign into this Martian sign, and Mercury was interacting with Venus, and then Mercury moves and starts interacting with Mars, and we get a different tone. We get, you know, whereas Mercury in Libra is going to be a little bit more like um diplomatic, or like telling nice stories that, you know, or like using language, like more flowery language, whereas Mercury in Scorpio, and especially when coming up against Mars, like Aryn was talking about earlier, which is what just happened yesterday, right? Yesterday was the Mercury-Mars. So that's going to be a little more like facing the truth, like being a little more honest and direct about it, and maybe even a little harsh. Any other thoughts about the transits that we want to talk about?
I think the last thing to just point out is this bottom bullet point here is that during Virgo season, Saturn, which was in Aries, retrograded back into Pisces. So we're now in this very last little epoch of Saturn and Pisces for like the next, 27 to 29 years. That's how long a Saturn cycle is. So if you are a Saturn and Pisces native like Aryn, this is the last kind of final pass of your Saturn return. So Saturn will be in Pisces from September 1st to February 13th. And think about what happened to you, right, during this solar eclipse in Virgo, because also Saturn was directly opposed the sun and moon in Virgo. So there is like a storyline, right? That was, I feel like this is like a deep integration of Saturn and Pisces. Personally, I'm very grateful. I love Saturn and Pisces, like have deeply fallen in love with this transit. And I think Saturn and Aries can be very great and very rebellious as well. But there's just something so softening about Saturn, very mystical manifestation of Saturn. And so I will be sad when Saturn is no longer in Pisces. So yeah, that's just the other kind of major outer.
Can I just get a little personal real quick? Because this was a really big transit for me. And I just want to say this Saturn placement, I think, had a really big part of it. During this eclipse season, I had a house fire and lost most of my possessions. I was renting and I didn't have insurance, renter's insurance. So I am in a place now of um a lot of insecurity and not having access to a lot of like I have access to a lot of resources via my relationships, which was another piece of this for me, this like Libra Virgo combination. I have a lot of really solid relationships, including the people on this podcast that have shown up for me in various ways, but I don't have a lot of like money resources is what I mean to say. And Saturn coming in and being there is interesting for me because Saturn is has to do with stability to me and has to do with responsibility and boundaries and also reality and like grounding you in reality. And what I'm finding over this journey of rebuilding, which has been a little over a month now that since this happened, is that I am being faced with truth about what I really desire. Saturn, it's also interacting for me in my like fifth house of like creative life and erotic life and stuff like that. So like there's something around like what I really desire, which partially for me is community, co-creation, being a part of something greater. And I lived in a very beautiful temple, my temple to Venus in the underworld of New Orleans, but I was also quite isolated there. And that doesn't mean that I don't love her and don't always want to return if she'll have me. But also, what it got me is kind of like into community here a little bit more and integrated a little bit more. And I just want to say that like Saturn is like restricting me and also helping me heal my financial life via this crisis, which is kind of a wild thing. So I think this is a really interesting way about Saturn and how Saturn works and also how Saturn retrograde specifically works, where it's like Saturn is contraction in opposition to like Jupiter's expansion, like Saturn, which Jupiter rules Pisces. So Saturn's coming in here and contracting, but the contraction does actually lead to expansion. And I think that really connects deeply to our story connection. So I kind of wanted to use that as a transition unless somebody else wants to say something about Saturn retrograde, because Aryn, you are a native to that.
Thank you for your vulnerability, because it is a really big thing that you've been through. And also, you having community to show up for you is a testament because you show up for community, right? That is just part of who you are. You are such a community oriented person. You are my deepest inspiration and model when it comes to community co creation, collaboration. And you bring so many people together, and it was, you show up for us and it's our turn to show up for you, so you deserve all the love and support and generosity because you are always leaving that yourself.
And it's hard to receive that. And that is something that else about Libra energy is we were talking about the unskillful side of Libra can be like a little martyry or a little like, and also Virgo can be like this. Like, I feel like the combo of this, it can be a little like, I'm used to being the one to be nice and make everyone like me and fix the problem if I'm Virgo or, you know what I mean? Whatever it is, instead of being the one to receive. But true balance requires giving and receiving. And that's something that I'm learning about right now. And it is challenging. So thank you for saying that. And also, I learn so much from my collaborators every day. And also, like, learning about how people show up and who shows up, has been a really interesting experience and a beautiful experience for me, because there was a lot of people that showed up in big ways that I didn't fully expect. And so, yeah, I'm just really grateful for all of that. So, yeah. Do we want to talk about anything else about Saturn and Pisces? Aryn, do you want to talk about your experience with Saturn and Pisces at all, or do you want to move on to the story?
Let's talk about the story.
So, yeah, I feel like that's kind of a good transition, like talking about how, Aryn, you brought up you were glad that I talked about Persephone's agency. Could you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. There's a lot of okay, so I think the beauty of myth, especially ancient myth, is that there's many ways to tell it and there's many translations that have impacted it. So I think that we can be flexible with myth, first of all. I say that as like someone who like makes up my own myths. And so there are versions of that story that depict Persephone as a victim that to me it's sort of like the story happens to her. And like you did tell a story where, yeah, something kind of happened to her, but then she was like, wait a sec. And like it actually was like a threshold for her to access her own desires, her own desire for sovereignty, literally, right? And depicted her in such a way, whereas I think, I don't know, there's some tellings of the story that just make her like so passive and not very active. Like it's almost like Demeter is the one running the show. But I think that it's also like that version also sort of speaks to a story of, I think, even like Venusian tension of my mother misses me, but there's something here that I really need to pursue myself. And I also think it depicts like a story about a parent and a child, of like a parent struggling to let go of their child who wants to go out in the world and explore who they are on their own. And so I just appreciated the various layers. Like I felt like you held a lot of the various tensions in a way that felt very beautiful and very inspiring. Like, I don't know, because I think I also follow some other witches on Instagram who have like a more aligned perspective of that story and myth with you, Dani. And I've learned so much from them where they see, Hades and Persephone, like that relationship being really reciprocal and really beautiful and not like a creepy old guy like abducting a younger woman, which like you have those stories too. And I think all stories can coexist at the same time. And I also do think though that like how you choose to tell a story says something about your worldview and your perspective, and shifting away from this like hyper fixation on assault, abduction, which those are real things to contend with, but also thinking about like Greek culture is so different than our present day American culture, and what we perceive as like negative or positive might have differed vastly. I even remember in the myth of Inanna, I think it was Inanna, there's like this other story about her where like someone sleeps with her without her consent, but it's not a story of like sexual assault. It's actually a story of like disrespecting divinity. And so I think people can be quite literal, but like myth isn't really supposed to be that way. Like the whole point is that it's like, yes, it's like telling a story about something literal, like, the seasonal transitions, but there's so much like juiciness and left up for interpretation. So, and I also resonate with like Persephone's journey because it reminds me of my South Node in Taurus, North Node in Scorpio, which the nodes speak to character evolution and growth. And it's really to balance the two, like what they two want. And for me, it's always the story of like leaving behind what's comfortable to finding comfort in the unknown. And I think that's literally what Persephone's journey is that she knew what her life was like with her mother. But then the next stage is that she's now engaging in relationships with others beyond her immediate family. So I just appreciated your take on it. So thank you.
I wanted to weave in the Ten of Swords. I feel like the retelling and giving Persephone autonomy, which also stood out to me, Dani, when you were saying that, that feels very Ten of Swords to me, right? Like there's many different iterations of this myth, and there's definitely more through that patriarchal lens of being the victim and the young woman without power. But Ten of Swords is like, well, we can compost that narrative, right? How can we compost that belief that Persephone is this victim? What are the ways that we can compost the beliefs, right? Thinking about our own personal victimhood, right? Like, I am someone who is a survivor of abuse and assault. And in what ways, right, can we reclaim our power? Because I think composting like a victim narrative is not to like bypass it or erase it at all, but it's to reclaim our own agency and our power. And I also think there's this whole theme here, right? One, we're coming to the end of season 1 of our podcast. We've been talking about Virgo and Libra, and I think the energy is thresholds, just like Persephone, right? When she was taken to the underworld, that was a massive threshold for her, right? The end of summer, crossing the threshold of the fall equinox into this dark half of the year, right? Like we are in the underworld, seasonally in the earth right now in the northern hemisphere, and there's this threshold, right? And when you cross a threshold, right? Usually something is stripped away, and there's some type, it serves as an initiation for growth, for transformation, for shedding, right? That death rebirth. So, Danny, sorry, no, I saw you were speaking as well. What were you gonna say?
Yeah. I mean, it's also like the equinox where we enter into the dark side of the year is when Persephone goes into the underworld, quite literally. So it is also associated with this exact timing too, because again, 6 months. She chose to eat 6 seeds and she justified it and rationalized it. But she still made that choice, even though she knew that eating anything in the underworld meant she had to stay. And I just want to emphasize what I was trying to say earlier, and you said it, Emily, which is that this doesn't erase like the true victimization that happens. And like, I am definitely somebody who doesn't love a power dynamic of a very young person and a very older person with a lot of power and like the negotiation of marriage. Like, that's none of that, like Aryn said, like none, like I don't interpret any of that literally because it's all about the change of the seasons. These are gods and goddesses. This is like is reflective of the Anana story of going into the underworld, one of the oldest stories known to humanity. And I interpret all myth and like a lot of the criticism that like Christians get is that they take it so literally. And I agree. Like, I think all story is still, even if it's not quite literal, it is beautiful and helpful and meaningful to interpret the symbols of these different things. And so we're talking about her. I mean, she literally was kind of trapped in this very comfortable place, and she felt a longing. We all have that. We all have that. There's some kind of longing, that we have to go somewhere else, do something else, return to something, whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's all that little stirring of desire and knowing that, like, when things aren't right, that things aren't 100% right? And I feel like that is a really key piece is that she, like, I feel like the piece of like having the feeling before the thing happened, and then like the thing happens, and she's like, grappling Libra, weighing the options and being like, oh, my mom, I'm devoted to her, but also like, this is kind of interesting. I've never been anywhere before. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So I'm absolutely not advocating for like large age gap relationships with young people, like very young people. I am, and obviously not like kidnapping somebody, not advocating for any of that, obviously. But I think like symbolically, it's kind of a beautiful thing. And personally, I'm experiencing something very similar to that. So, and the other thing I wanted to point out about the story is that Zeus, who's all powerful Zeus, making all these decisions for everybody, like the fascist that he is being held accountable by Demeter, who has very little power except to withhold her labor. And she goes on strike, and that is what gets her what she wants. So I just want to throw that.
It's almost like striking is an effective strategy to get what you want.
I think in the prep when we were prepping for this episode, one of the notes that I wrote down, I think Dani said it, like the only true tactic to confront empire, right? Who has all the money and resources in the world, all of the weapons and military power in the world. The only way to really confront and like to disable them is through withholding our labor, right? Because it's like they care about that profit and the economic engine and this true like workers strike. So I love like kind of harking back to the Chicago Teachers Union, CTU. Yeah, the labor organizing they're doing, that is a powerful, radical labor union. And yeah, there's just a lot of power that we as workers have to withhold our labor. And that is a powerful tactic.
And okay, if you don't believe us, because you maybe don't know us and you don't know how smart we are, I will say that there's a reason that they target people who are doing that kind of organizing. There's a reason that they're going after people who say that they are anti-fascism. There's a reason they go after people who say that you should go on strike and withhold your labor in order to get what you want. There's a reason they're doing that. And the reason is because they know how powerful that actually is. So if you don't believe us, believe what you see, that they are targeting innocent people because of their ability to confront empire. And that is just the truth of it.
Mic
Do
drop.
we have anything else that we want to add about the story? Is there anything anybody wants to say? Do we have any personal reflection questions today? I think that was the one thing we forgot to do.
I think my reflections would just be about thinking about the thresholds that you're moving through, right? Like autumn is a time of releasing, right? And it's very energetically aligned that we're taking a break with the podcast, we're ending season 1, but thinking about in all aspects of life, right? Like Dani just shared her very vulnerable experience that she's going through with this eclipse, right? Like lots of things being stripped away. And then there's the intentional things that we set down to kind of prune back, compost, so that new, beautiful, luscious birth and life can grow. And also grieving, right? Taking time to grieve because composting, releasing, it's not always easy. There's grief in that, right? So taking the time to grieve. But I would just invite our listeners to think about any of the thresholds that you're moving through. Maybe what do you need to let go of so that you can make space come, the spring for new life to be born.
I love that. I would also add, inspired by the Persephone story, what is in the underworld that is alluring to you that's maybe a little scary to admit or go after?
I don't have anything to add to that. Those are great questions. This has been our final Astro Church episode and our final episode of season 1, the Libra Virgo season. Thank you to my co-hosts, Aryn and Emily, and thank you to everyone who has been a part of our journey over the last year. This has been a really lovely season, and we can't wait to see you again in the springtime.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Soul Connections. To support the show, please share this episode with a friend and give us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
This podcast is an act of community co-creation with artwork designed by Bree Legan and original music written, produced, and performed by Sophia Mock, Queen Bonobo, Liv LaFlove, and Danielle Renee.
To connect with us or our guest, visit the links in the show notes. Until next time.